Welcome back to Moonnest. Tonight, we step into a village where time doesn't tick, it listens. Settle in as we visit the clockmaker who mends not minutes, but memories. There was a library no one remembered. Not because it had vanished, but because the world had hurried past it, and it had not hurried after. It stood quietly between two forgotten streets near the edge of a city too loud to hear the hush it offered. Its stones were old and kindly, its roof softened by moss, and the windows wore veils of ivy so thick they caught the wind like lullabies. There was no sign, no bell, no welcome carved above the arching wooden door. But still, the library waited, not closed, not open, simply present. People passed it as they might a sleeping cat, with a glance, a pause, and then a moving on. Children played near it but never touched the gate. Birds perched on its roof but never nested. Even the rain changed its rhythm when it fell upon that rooftop, more thoughtful, more still. But one child noticed. Her name was Illyra. She was not the sort of child who needed noise to feel alive. She liked quiet places and things that others overlooked. Her coat was too big, her voice was soft, and her pockets were full of things that didn't matter to anyone else, a pebble shaped like a question mark, a feather with silver tips, a glass marble with a crack like a frozen storm. Her eyes were wide and kind, the color of old pages. Every day, Illyra passed the library. She did not peek through the ivy or press her hand to the door. She only looked, long and gently, as though she understood the secret of it, that some things speak best when left unspoken. Then, one afternoon, something changed. A breeze stirred, soft but certain. The ivy shifted just slightly, like curtains pulled aside by invisible hands. The gate, once rusted shut by silence, stood ajar. And at the threshold, nestled between two moss-dark stones, lay a key. Not metal. Not cold. Not rusted. It was made of willow wood, pale and smooth, shaped by care and time. Its bough curved like a sleeping fern, its teeth shaped like tiny leaves. Illyra picked it up slowly, reverently, as though it might sigh. And in the quiet deep within the library's heart, something stirred. Not a lock. Not a hinge. A breath. As if the building had just woken from a long, peaceful dream, and found her standing there. The door opened, not with a creak, but with a sound like a yawn at twilight. Soft. Unhurried. As if the wood itself had stretched after a long rest and remembered what it meant to welcome someone in. Illyra stepped inside. The air smelled of cool stone and something more elusive, like morning mist curling through a forest, or the sigh of a book finally opened. The air was not musty, not stale. It was old, yes, but tenderly so. Like a memory kept warm in a pocket. The floor beneath her feet was smooth with age. Leaves lay scattered across the flagstones, blown in through the years by stubborn breezes. The light that trickled in through cracks in the ivy-draped windows was the color of candle smoke, soft gold tinged with green. She wandered deeper. No voice called her name. No lantern flickered to life. But the hush that wrapped around her felt welcoming, almost curious. The shelves she passed stood tall and slightly bowed, like trees grown wise with waiting. Some held books bound in cloth or bark, others wore no titles at all. Many shelves were bare, not empty, but waiting. Then, beyond a shelf that leaned like it had paused mid-thought, she found it. A staircase. Narrow. Spiral. Made of pale stone damp with dew. Its curve wound downward, each step etched with faint markings, roots, leaves, feathers, and stars. A small wooden sign hung beside it, carved in the shape of an open blossom. The letters, faded but graceful, read, "To the roots of story." Illyra's fingers brushed the willow key in her coat pocket. It pulsed faintly, like the beat of a wing. She stepped onto the first stair. No sound followed her. Even her breath quieted, as if listening. And as she descended, stone by stone, curve by curve, the air grew warmer, sweeter, like soil kissed by rain. Below, far below, a light flickered. Green, gold, and growing. The garden was waiting. The steps curved inward like a spiral whispered into stone. As Illyra moved downward, the scent of old paper gave way to something richer, something living. It was not the wild smell of an overgrown place, but the tender hush of a garden that had never been seen, only dreamed. The walls glimmered with tiny veins of quartz and moss. Soft lights, like floating seeds, drifted just beyond reach. There were no lanterns. No torches. Yet everything glowed, gently, greenly, like sunlight passing through leaves in spring. The air felt like warm rain remembered. And then, after what could have been moments or hours, the stairs widened into an archway. The stone opened like the mouth of a cave, but what lay beyond was no cavern. It was a garden. It stretched beneath the earth, held in a chamber carved from silence and light. Roots hung from the ceiling like braided lace, glittering with droplets that never fell. The floor was soft with moss and soil stitched with light. And all across the garden grew things Illyra could not name. Not just flowers, though there were many, in every shade dreamt by dusk. But books. Or things like books. Some plants had petals shaped like pages, others grew in tight spirals, their leaves etched with curling script. One tree bore fruit shaped like inkwells, dripping with golden sap. A cluster of tall white lilies hummed softly when the air moved. And at the garden's heart, nestled in a ring of stones, stood a single blossom taller than Illyra, glowing softly from within. It was not labeled. Not caged. Not lit. It simply bloomed. And the moment Illyra stepped fully into the garden, it turned, just slightly, toward her. Not as a plant does, but as a story might. One that had waited a very long time to be read. Illyra did not speak. She wasn't sure if she could. The hush in that space was too deep, too kind. Words would have been like pebbles tossed into a still pool, unnecessary, perhaps even unkind. So she breathed. She stood very still. And the garden breathed with her. It wasn't a trick of air or wind, but something gentler, the way leaves shivered without moving, or how light shifted as though stirred by memory. She stepped forward carefully, the moss springing lightly beneath her shoes. All around her, plants opened and turned, faintly, slowly, as if recognizing her. She passed vines that held small, closed books between their leaves. A bush whispered faint phrases in a language she did not know, though the tone made her feel safe, like bedtime. Then she came to the central bloom. It shimmered with threads of light in its center, and along each petal were symbols too fluid to stay still. The petals did not sway with breeze, there was none here, but with thought, or something near it. Illyra knelt before it. The blossom leaned slightly toward her in return. And in her mind, without sound, without voice, came a question. Not spoken, not written, just known. Do you wish to remember, or be remembered? Illyra blinked, heart slow. She did not understand entirely. But she thought of the key. Of the silence in the library. Of her pockets full of forgotten things. She answered, not with words, but with stillness. And the flower opened, just a little more. A single petal unfolded, revealing a line of glowing script, fading as quickly as moonlight on water. She could not read it, but she felt it settle within her. Like a seed. Like a beginning. The garden whispered again, not louder, but closer. And Illyra realized, these were not flowers at all. They were stories. And this was where they came to grow. The petals' soft glow faded, and the blossom returned to stillness, but something had shifted. Illyra could feel it, not with her hands or her eyes, but somewhere quieter. As though a tiny thread had been tied to her heart. She stood, slowly, letting her fingers brush a vine that reached for her in return. It curled lightly around her sleeve, as if to say, stay as long as you like. And so she did. She wandered deeper into the garden, following the soft green light and the hum of unread tales. Each path wound gently into the next, like sentences curling toward a paragraph. No straight lines. Only stories. To her left, a tree stood with bark like parchment. Its trunk bore symbols that shimmered and faded, returning with each blink. Its roots cradled piles of fallen leaves shaped like open books. Illyra crouched to lift one. The leaf was thin and strong, its veins forming delicate words in a language she almost, but not quite, understood. She held it gently, and her breath caught. Images rose behind her eyes, a mountain wrapped in cloud, a song sung across a frozen river, the warmth of two hands parting in peace. She hadn't read them. She had remembered them. As if the tree had once held this story, and now, so did she. She placed the leaf back among the others and looked up. The tree's branches swayed slightly, without wind. And in that moment, Illyra understood, the stories in this garden were not just to be read. They were to be shared. To be carried. To be planted again, somewhere, sometime, in someone else. As Illyra wandered farther, the garden deepened. Its edges did not end but folded in on themselves like dreams that stretch into new shapes. She passed a pond no wider than a teacup, its water perfectly still. Inside it floated tiny letters, not swimming, not sinking, just drifting. Some formed words she couldn't quite catch. Others faded before they finished. But the pawn didn't mind. It was not here to explain. She knelt beside it, just to watch. The moment stretched softly. And then she noticed the shadow. It was not frightening, just different. At the base of a large spiral bush, woven with vines and what looked like bookmark ribbons, stood a figure. Tall and gentle, shaped like the trunk of a tree, its arms folded like quiet branches. Its eyes, if they were eyes, glowed faintly with moss-colored light. It did not move. But it was aware. And then Illyra understood, this was the librarian. Not of books, but of roots. Of memory. Of story. The figure reached toward her, not quickly, not with urgency. One hand, long-fingered and bark-textured, opened slowly. In its palm lay a seed. Round. Pale. Quiet. No words passed between them, but she knew. This seed was not from the garden. It was for her. She took it without speaking, holding it close. It did not pulse. It did not glow. But it was alive. And it had waited a long, long time to be held. The seed in Illyra's hand was small, almost weightless. Its surface was smooth, but not polished, soft like river stone, warm like sunlit wood. And though it made no sound, she felt a kind of hush bloom around it, as if everything near had paused to listen. She glanced up at the librarian. The figure had already stepped back into the spiraled bush, or perhaps had become part of it once more. Its shape was fading, trunk into vine, shadow into leaf. Not disappearing, only returning. Like a breath let out slowly. Illyra looked down again. The seed pulsed faintly now, not with light, but with memory. And somehow, she understood, it was not a story yet. It was the beginning of one. She looked around the garden, at the humming lilies, the trees of parchment bark, the glowing blossoms spinning gentle script into the air. All these stories had once been seeds. Each had waited, until someone, somewhere, had given them presence. But where would hers be planted? The garden offered no answer. Instead, a narrow path opened to her right, not with fanfare, not with light, but simply by being there when she turned. The vines had leaned away from one another just enough to reveal a stone stair, newer, less worn, still speckled with petals and dust. And though no voice spoke, she felt it again. This part is yours to find. So she walked on, quiet feet on quiet stone, carrying a story that had not yet begun. And all around her, the garden exhaled. As though it trusted her. The staircase curved gently, more slope than steps, its edges softened by moss and time. As Illyra descended, the air cooled, not cold, but deep, like the air beneath heavy roots or the silence between heartbeats. She passed walls lined with carved markings. Some were symbols, others were shapes, spirals, feathers, drops of rain held in stone. Each one seemed to shimmer slightly as she passed, though she did not touch them. She sensed they were not decorations, but echoes, remnants of others who had walked this way, each carrying a seed of their own. At the bottom of the stair was a clearing. Circular. Still. Dimly lit by a soft glow above, light that didn't fall from any lantern or window, but from a single blossom at the center of the room. It hovered above the soil without stem or root, like a floating memory. And in the center of the circle, a patch of earth waited. It wasn't marked. It didn't glow. But she knew. Kneeling, Illyra brushed the soil with her fingers. It was cool and rich, and it smelled faintly of ink and rain. She cupped the seed gently in both hands, then pressed it into the earth. No voice spoke. No light burst forth. Only this: the seed settled into place, and was still. She remained kneeling, her hands resting on the soil. And slowly, slowly, she smiled. The hush deepened. Something had begun. But it did not need to bloom quickly. It would grow in its own time. Just like her. Illyra remained beside the place she had planted the seed. She did not wait for something to happen, she simply stayed, letting the hush of the garden fill her ears, her breath, her thoughts. The light above was dimming now, folding into a shade that felt not like night, but like the very last page of a book softly closing. And then, a sound. So quiet, she almost missed it. Not a rustle. Not a hum. Not words. It was the garden, singing. No melody. No chorus. Just a slow rhythm of presence. The kind of music made by roots moving gently beneath the earth, or raindrops whispering into moss. A lullaby that had no beginning and asked for no end. The blossom that floated above the planting place shimmered once, and then drifted upward, vanishing into the garden's unseen heights. In its place, a soft breath of air stirred the soil. Illyra touched her hand to the ground where the seed had gone. Warmth. Not heat, not light, just warmth, like a hand held in trust. She stood slowly, not with the excitement of completion, but the calm of something beginning, quietly, deeply, in a place where time moved like water in sleep. The path behind her was no longer narrow. It had opened, widened, leading her gently back into the winding heart of the garden. Petals turned as she passed. Leaves lifted, just slightly, as though nodding. And all around her, the hush was alive. Not with answers, but with welcome. She returned to where she had first entered, where the garden arched into the world above, and the roots from the ceiling still glistened with unmoving dew. But something was waiting for her now. A pedestal stood just beside the stairway. She was sure it hadn't been there before. Upon it rested a book, not like those on the library's upper shelves, or even those grown from vines. This one was simple. Bound in soft green fabric. No title. No author. No symbol at all. But when she stepped near, her name, Illyra, appeared faintly on the cover, traced in light. She did not open it right away. She ran her hand over the fabric, feeling its warmth, its softness, the quiet weight of something known but not yet spoken. She opened the book gently, and found that each page was blank. But not empty. Some shimmered slightly, like water catching the edge of moonlight. Some smelled faintly of places she'd never been. Others seemed to hold a hush, as if listening. And on one page, near the center, she found something new. A tiny sketch of a seed. Next to it, in careful, curling script, just 2 words. Not yet. She smiled, not with confusion, but with recognition. This was her story now. Not to rush. Not to finish. But to live. Illyra closed the book, cradling it gently in her arms. It felt neither old nor new, neither heavy nor light, but perfectly suited to be carried. It didn't speak. It didn't guide. Yet with each step she took, the book seemed to settle against her like a sleeping cat, warm and steady. The garden behind her remained lit, not by lanterns or fireflies, but by the stories themselves, glowing faintly in root and bloom. Nothing called her back, but nothing pushed her away either. It was the kind of leaving that felt like pausing a favorite song, not finished, only waiting. As she began her climb back up the spiral stairs, the moss softened beneath her shoes. The air grew cooler, quieter, or perhaps the quiet simply changed shape. Not silence now, but knowing. She passed the carved symbols in the walls again, but this time, she understood them a little more, not with the mind, but with the heart. Spirals meant return. Leaves meant offering. Feathers meant trust. She reached the top step just as the first glow of dusk slipped in through the high, ivy-cloaked windows. The library above had not changed, but it felt different. As if it had taken one long breath and exhaled the weight of 100 sleeping years. She stood still in the golden hush. The book held against her chest. And for a long time, she simply listened. When Illyra stepped outside, the sky was painted in watercolor twilight, soft blue melting into rose, cloud edges lit like pages catching firelight. She walked slowly. The willow key still rested in her pocket, now cool again, as if it had passed its warmth to the seed, and the seed to her. Behind her, the library door clicked closed, not loudly, not with finality, but with a kind of peace. It had not locked. It had simply returned to waiting. She passed between the curling iron gates, now half swallowed by green. Past the stones where the key had first found her. Past the streets that didn't know a garden bloomed just beneath their feet. And as she walked, something gentle happened. A vine stirred near a lamppost. A fallen leaf shimmered faintly on the wind. A crack in the pavement softened with moss. She looked down at the book in her arms and smiled. The garden had not stayed below. It was with her now. Not in petals or glowing blossoms, but in stillness. In presence. In the space between heartbeats where stories begin. And though she did not know when the seed would sprout, nor where, nor how, she trusted it would. Because she had seen where stories sleep. And she had planted one herself. That night, as stars pressed gently into the sky, Illyra curled into her bed, the book on her windowsill, the key resting beside it. And as sleep drifted over her like mist curling over soft soil, she dreamed not of endings, but of things just beginning. Let the hush guide you downstream. where the river has forgotten how to move. And the moon is calling something home. In a hollow beneath the hills, where mist moved like memory and even the trees leaned inward as if listening to some soft and secret tale, there was a village where time did not run, it wandered. The village was not large, nor rich, nor marked by anything of note on maps, but those who found it often stayed longer than they meant to. It was a place where tea never cooled too fast, and shadows took their time stretching across the cobbled lanes. It was called Quiet Hollow, and the name suited it like a well-worn blanket. Here, no one rang bells to begin the day. No factory whistles cried out. Time moved at the pace of bread rising, of dew sinking into moss, of thoughts gently finishing themselves. Children played until their laughter turned to yawns. Elders sat by windows, nodding not from sleep, but from slow contentment. Lanterns were lit not on a schedule, but when the sky looked thoughtful. And at the edge of this timeless place stood a crooked little shop with a mossy roof and a door painted the color of quiet rain. Inside lived the last clockmaker, a man named Barley. He was not young, nor old, just settled. His hands were gentle, his eyes full of weather, and his back curved ever so slightly, as if he'd once bowed to time and never quite straightened again. His workshop was filled with clocks, but none quite matched. Some ticked. Others sighed. A few blinked like sleepy owls in the dark. Barley did not fix clocks so much as listen to them. And sometimes, if a clock refused to run, he would simply sit beside it, whisper something soft, and wait. Time in Quiet Hollow did not need to be mended. It only needed to be remembered. There was one clock in Barley's shop that no one was allowed to touch. Not because it was dangerous, or even delicate, but because it was listening. It sat high on a shelf in the back corner, surrounded by dried lavender and tiny paper stars. Its face was made of soft, pale stone, moon-colored, with a faint shimmer like breath caught on glass. And it had no hands at all. The villagers called it the heart clock. It had never ticked. Never chimed. Never moved. Yet it had always been there, even before Barley arrived. He spoke of it rarely, and when he did, it was only in small words, like, "It knows," or "It remembers." No one knew what it remembered, or how. Only that sometimes, very rarely, it glowed. And when it did, something in the village changed. One fog-thick morning, as frost curled like lace over the rooftops and the hollow blinked slowly into waking, Barley noticed it. The heart clock was glowing. Not brightly, just a faint shimmer, like light passing through a dream. But it was enough. He wiped his hands on his apron, turned off the kettle, and stepped closer. At its base lay something unexpected. A feather. But not a bird's feather. Not quite. It was longer, softer. Edged in silver. And it hummed faintly with warmth, though the room was cold. Barley held it in his palm for a long while, feeling it tug, gently, like a thread pulling from a far-off place. He set the feather beside the heart clock. Then he lit his lantern, opened a drawer carved with wind symbols, and took out a key no one had seen in years. The girl was returning. And time, it seemed, had remembered her before she remembered herself. Long ago, though the hollow measured such things lightly, a girl had lived in the room above Barley's shop. She had come in on the first warm wind of a long-forgotten spring, carrying nothing but a small satchel, a wind chime made of glass, and a clock that didn't tick. She never gave her name. Or perhaps she had, and the name simply blew away in the breeze. Barley remembered her best by the clock she built, one unlike any other. It was delicate, strung with ribbons and tiny wheels that spun only when wind touched them. No pendulum. No gears. Just soft motion, like breath wrapped around brass. She'd lived there one summer, mending watches and whispering to pocket clocks. She never stayed in one place for long, but here, in Quiet Hollow, she had lingered. And before she left, she made a promise, not the loud kind, not carved in stone. A quiet promise, spoken beneath the willow near the edge of the village. If it ever ticks again, she told Barley, placing the wind clock in his hands, it means I'm remembering. Then she vanished, carried off like mist in the morning. Barley had kept the clock safe all these years. It had hung from the rafters, unmoving, forgotten by time but not by him. Now, as the feather rested near the glowing heart clock, Barley looked up, and saw the wind clock swaying. Its ribbons stirred. The tiniest will turned once, then twice. Tick. Then silence. But it was enough. That evening, Barley prepared the shop the way one prepares a room for an old friend. He swept the floor, though the dust had arranged itself poetically. He turned the face of every clock slightly, so their eyes did not stare. He set a fresh candle in the window, not to guide, but to welcome. And when night deepened, he lit the whisper lanterns. There were 12 of them, hanging outside along the fence that circled the garden behind his shop. Not oil lamps. Not torches. But small glass globes filled with threads of old breath, captured from long-forgotten sighs, the kind people gave when stepping into a warm room or hearing the end of a lullaby. The lanterns glowed softly, each one flickering to life as Barley passed. They did not shine outward. They drew light inward, like memories finding their way home. When the final lantern lit, Barley stood back and looked toward the western path, the one that curved through the sleeping orchard and vanished into the hills. He didn't expect to see her. Not tonight. Not so soon. But the wind clock had ticked, and the feather had found its way here. The world was turning inward. And that meant something was about to return, not with noise, not with spectacle, but with the softness of something long remembered. The next morning, Barley walked beyond the garden gate, past the path of whisper lanterns, and into the meadow behind the orchard. It was a quiet stretch of land, untouched by roads or fences, where the grass grew long and silver in the early light. Nothing was planted here, and nothing harvested. It simply was, a place that held all the things people meant to say but never did. The villagers called it the meadow of unspoken things. Here, birds sang in unfinished melodies, and petals from the wild jasmine drifted in spirals rather than lines. The air always smelled a little of rain, even on the driest days, and the wind paused often, perhaps to listen, or perhaps because it had nowhere else it needed to be. Barley walked slowly, his lantern tucked under one arm, the wind clock cradled in the other. His boots pressed softly into the dew-damped grass. He followed no trail, only the rhythm of the wind, which tugged ever so faintly toward the far edge of the field. It was there, near a cluster of moss-covered stones shaped like folded wings, that he saw it. A second feather. This one smaller, darker, and curled slightly at the tip, like it had been carried too long and forgotten how to stretch. Barley knelt beside it. It was warm. And beneath it, the grass was pressed down, just slightly, as if someone had rested there in the night. The clock in his hands ticked once more. Soft. Certain. She was closer now. And the hollow was beginning to remember her, too. Back in the village, something subtle had changed. It began with the bells. Quiet Hollow didn't use bells for keeping time, those had long been set aside in favor of shadows and sunbeams, but they still existed, above doorways, on cottage porches, at the ends of long strings that cats often batted when no one was watching. They chimed when someone returned home. When bread was ready. When an old friend knocked without needing to say hello. But that day, not a single bell rang. Not one. Not because they were broken, but because they were waiting. Barley noticed it as he passed through the square. The baker's bell usually jingled with every customer, but it hung still, though the door opened twice. Even the schoolhouse bell, which rang only when the wind leaned just right, hung silent in the breeze. Time, it seemed, was holding its breath. Barley paused beneath the willow tree at the edge of the square. Its long limbs dangled like thoughts too delicate to speak. He touched its bark, closed his eyes, and listened. Far off, faint as memory, soft as a forgotten dream, he heard it. Footsteps. One set. Steady. Not hurried. Drawing closer. And though he smiled, he didn't open his eyes. He simply whispered to the tree. "She's almost here." It was nearly twilight when she returned. Not with a clamor. Not with a carriage. Not even with footsteps that hurried. She came walking through the orchard, her coat dusted with sleep and the scent of pine still in her hair. She wore no shoes. Carried no bag. And yet she walked like someone carrying something vast, an echo, a hush, a weight made entirely of memory. The mist curled around her ankles, soft and welcoming. The air bent slightly with her passing, as if the hollow itself bowed to her return. The whisper lanterns, long dimmed by day, began to glow once more as she passed, one by one, their lights pulsing faintly like the rhythm of breath remembered. And when she reached the garden gate behind Barley's shop, the wind clock, still hanging just inside the window, spun once, twice, then came to a perfect stop. Barley, seated on the small wooden bench near the time beds, didn't speak. She didn't either. She only stepped through the gate and sat beside him, her hands resting in her lap like a folded letter no longer in need of reading. The sky turned silver as the stars blinked into place, and the hollow held its breath. Barley reached into his coat pocket and drew out the second feather, the one he had found in the meadow. She looked at it, then at him, and nodded once, softly, as though a clock inside her had just begun to tick again. They sat together in the garden, surrounded by thyme, lavender, and the low glow of the lanterns. No words passed between them, not for a long while. The hollow had no taste for rushing, and Barley had never been a man who pulled stories before they were ready to be told. The girl, though she was no longer quite a girl, traced the rim of a smooth stone near her knee, her fingers moving slowly, thoughtfully. Her coat was worn now, faded in places, but still the same one she'd left in. Its seams were frayed, its pockets sagging. And from one, the edge of a folded paper peeked out. A map. Or perhaps just a memory. Barley looked at her hands, slimmer than he remembered, but strong. She had traveled far. Not just across distance, but through time, the kind that lives between days and under silence. "I never meant to be gone," she said at last. Her voice was quieter than he remembered, like wind caught in the ribs of a bell. "I know," he said, and that was enough. She unfolded the paper and laid it between them. Not a map after all, but a drawing, inked in slow, careful strokes. A tree. A hill. A clock without hands. And a small house beneath a mossy roof. "I didn't draw it," she murmured. "It just appeared. One morning. In a place where no morning should have been." Barley touched the edge of the page. The lines shimmered faintly in the lantern light. The hollow had sent her a picture of home. Not to call her back, but to remind her it had never left. The night deepened around the garden, not with darkness, but with presence. The air grew still, not heavy, but expectant, like the moment before a candle is lit or a name is spoken after long silence. The whisper lantern swayed ever so slightly, even though the wind had gone to sleep. Somewhere nearby, the bells remained quiet. Barley stood slowly and opened the back door of the shop. It sighed on its hinges, as though relieved to be part of the story once more. The girl, now woman, though still wrapped in that same old hush, followed him inside. She paused near the threshold, as if letting her memory catch up. The scent of lavender, dust, and thyme wrapped around her like an old shawl. There, on the shelf at the far end of the room, the heart clock glowed. Still soft. Still pale. Its stone face shimmered with the light of something just beginning to remember. No hands. No sound. Just light, pulsing faintly in rhythm with the quiet around them. The woman stepped forward. And for the first time in years, Barley did not stand beside her. He let her be. She reached out, not to touch, but to let her presence rest beside the clocks. And the light grew brighter. The clock pulsed once, then again. And a single circle appeared in the center of its face, glowing like the iris of an eye that has just awakened. It did not tick. But it knew. It remembered her. Barley opened a small wooden drawer beneath the heart clock. It was carved with vines and a tiny spiral, its surface worn smooth by decades of careful fingers. Inside lay a single object wrapped in velvet, a key, simple and round, made not of brass or silver, but of something softer. Wood, perhaps. Or bone. Or memory. He held it out without explanation. And the woman took it without asking. It fit her hand perfectly. She closed her fingers around it and sighed, not the sigh of sorrow, but of quiet return. A letting go without regret. There was a door, she said softly. In the place I wandered. It didn't have a handle. Only a space where something used to be. Barley nodded. The door wasn't meant to open from the outside, he said. She smiled. And for the first time in a long while, her smile did not ache. The heart clock's face faded back to stillness, but its light remained, a quiet reminder that some things do not move until they're truly seen. And some journeys are not for finding answers. Only for remembering that one has always belonged. They waited until morning. Not because the clock had told them, but because the light outside the shop began to change. It came like warm milk into tea, slow and curling. The mist lifted. The frost melted from the window glass. And the first bird sang not with cheer, but with the low, sweet note of something remembered. Barley and the woman stood beneath the willow tree just after the third blink of starlight faded from the sky. The wind clock spun slowly above them, ribbons lifting like fingertips in prayer. At the base of the willow, half buried by moss, lay a door. Small. Arched. Etched with spirals. It hadn't always been there. Or perhaps it had, quiet and patient, waiting to be noticed. The woman knelt and ran her fingers along its edge. The wood sighed beneath her touch. She took the key, smooth, warm, and placed it into the hollow where a knot in the wood had once been. It turned without effort. And the door opened inward. But there were no stairs. No darkness. No roots or tunnels. Just light. Soft and golden. Like the pages of a book turning somewhere far away. Barley did not speak. He only placed his hand gently on her shoulder. She stepped through. And the willow swayed, not with wind, but with relief. Barley sat alone that evening, beside the garden, with a warm cup of milk steeped with cinnamon and thyme. The lanterns glowed softly in the branches above, no longer flickering, but steady. The wind clock hung still and silent now, as if exhaling its last whisper. In his shop, the heart clock had returned to its gentle shimmer. And for the first time in many years, it no longer waited. Barley closed his eyes. Not to sleep, but to rest. The hollow moved around him, slowly, as always. The children's laughter drifted through the evening air. The bakery's bell rang twice, soft and low. And the stars blinked into being, each one settling in as if finding its old place again. Somewhere beneath the willow, the door still stood. Closed now, but not shut. Waiting, perhaps, for someone else, someone who had wandered far and needed to come home without needing to be found. Because in quiet hollow, time did not heal. It held. And in that holding, it whispered. You were never forgotten. Close your eyes and breathe in quiet. In this tale, dreams grow as blossoms. And a boy walks a garden only the stars truly understand. At the edge of the world, not the edge where things fall away, but the edge where things begin to quiet, there was a hill shaped like a sigh. It rose not with pride, but with softness, folding up from the earth as if it had grown weary of hiding and wished only to lean against the sky. This hill had no name in any book or song, but those who came close, without maps, without questions, called it the Dreaming Hill. It was said that stars, when they grew too full of wishes, sometimes fell there. Not with fire, not with noise, but with a hush, like feathers settling on still water. And where the stars touched the earth, a garden grew. Not one with rows or fences, nor one sown with hands. It was a garden of petals and echoes, of blossoms shaped like eyes closing and stems that swayed only when someone stopped looking. No one planted it. No one tended it. It simply grew when dreams forgot themselves. And in the heart of this garden lived a boy named Cale. He wasn't old, but he had watched many winters smooth the hill's crown with white. He wasn't a gardener by trade, nor a dreamer by choice, but he belonged to the garden the way a lullaby belongs to the hush that follows. Each morning, Cale walked the paths between sleeping blooms, his feet bare, his thoughts soft. He carried a basket, not to gather, but to return what had wandered. Because sometimes, when dreams fall too far, they forget where they were meant to rest. On the first morning of the frost-blush season, when the grass turned silver and the sky grew pale with listening, Cale found something strange beside the stone that marked the garden's center. It was not a blossom, not a fruit. It was a dream, but not yet asleep. It shimmered like a drop of water that had forgotten to fall. Its edges flickered, uncertain. And when Cale knelt beside it, he could hear the sound of breath, not his own, but the dream's. Slow, uneven, like a child trying not to cry in the dark. He cupped it gently in his hands. It was heavier than the others had been. Most dreams were light as moth wings, fading into root or petal within moments. But this one held shape and sorrow. Cale looked out across the garden. The blooms leaned slightly toward him, though no wind stirred. Somewhere, a branch sighed as a leaf let go. He rose, carrying the unsettled dream in his basket, and began to walk the spiral path that curved inward around the sleeping blossoms. As he passed each plant, the dream in his basket flickered, sometimes growing lighter, sometimes heavier, as if searching for something it could not name. None of the flowers opened. None of the roots stirred. This dream was not ready to rest. Not yet. So Cale did what he had never done before. He took the dream home, wrapped it in wool, and placed it gently beside his own bed. That night, the stars above the hill blinked slower than usual. And below, in a small cottage filled with the scent of earth and candle wax, a dream watched someone sleep. That night, Cale slept with the dream curled like a small moon beside his pillow. He had wrapped it in wool, yes, but still its glow touched the beams of the ceiling and turned the shadows pale. It pulsed faintly, not with heat, not with light, but with a rhythm like breath, or memory. He had tucked it in as he would a tired thought, gently and without question. The house creaked once as the wind passed by. A quiet murmur from the garden answered, the way old leaves speak to branches in their sleep. Cale dreamed that night, but not of his own thoughts. He saw a room that flickered like candlelight on water. In it sat a child, eyes wide with worry, clutching something that had already slipped away. There was no voice, no name, no face to hold on to. Only the weight of a feeling too large to carry and too familiar to forget. When he woke, the dream on his bedside had dimmed. Not vanished, but quieter. As if it had listened with him. He did not touch it. He only watched it flicker once, then turn itself slightly, as if nestling deeper into the quilt. That day, he did not bring it back to the garden. Instead, he left it sleeping. And in the garden, not a single blossom opened. But the wind turned north, and the sky, just for a moment, wore the color of something long remembered. The next morning, Cale returned to the garden. He walked the path as he always had, barefoot, silent, with his basket against one hip and the weight of unspoken dreams trailing like a shadow. The soil was cool, pressed with the patterns of dew. The air had the crisp taste of waiting. He passed the spiral-stemmed vine that usually turned its face toward his step. Today, it bowed low instead, as if heavy with thought. And then, near the stone at the heart of the garden, he saw something new. A blossom, one he hadn't seen before, had bloomed in the night. But it faced away. All other flowers in the garden turned inward, toward the center, curling like question marks into the spiral of the garden's breath. But this one leaned outward, toward the forest beyond, its petals sharp with edge light, its stalk braced as though standing guard. He approached slowly, careful not to let his shadow cross it. Its color shifted with the breeze, dusk rose, hollow gold, and a faint blue of hesitation. Cale knelt. At its base, pressed gently into the soil, lay a thread of silver wool. His breath caught. The dream had left it. Not all of itself, just a strand, like a trail of thought unraveling back towards something it wasn't ready to face alone. The blossom did not shiver. But Cale felt it watching. Not asking to be picked. Only to be understood. That night, the dream would not sleep. It flickered at Cale's bedside like a small lamp left burning long after the pages of a book have turned to breath. He had wrapped it again, nestled it in wool, spoken kindly to it without using words, but still it stirred, faint and restless. Outside, the garden slept. But the wind had changed. It moved in little spirals near the shutters, like it was circling something it couldn't quite name. Cale sat up in bed and looked toward the window, drawn not by sound, but by the weight of a presence too soft to be footsteps and too still to be gone. He rose, barefoot, and opened the door. The dream uncurled in the basket beside his bed. He didn't carry it this time. It followed. Or perhaps it led. Outside, the air shimmered with the hush of almost speaking. The stars above blinked slower than usual, and the mist at the edge of the garden glowed faintly, as if moonlight had chosen to hide there. At the farthest edge of the garden, near where the forest pressed gently against the earth, stood a figure. Not tall. Not cloaked. Just still. Wrapped in starlight the way some are wrapped in shawls. Cale did not call out. He only stood there, breathing with the hush. And the dream in the basket gave a single, quiet sound. Not a word. Just a sigh that sounded like remembering. Morning brought no footprints. Cale searched the edge of the garden where the figure had stood, softly, without hurry. The grass was unbent. The moss untouched. Not even the dew had parted. But he knew someone had come. Not from fear. From knowing. The dream no longer flickered. It pulsed now, slow and sure, like a heart that has found its rhythm again after many nights of unrest. It no longer hovered, but settled, its glow sinking closer to the earth, its edges softened like frost melting into morning. Cale set it gently on the threshold of the garden. It did not roll away. It stayed. And when he stepped back, the strange outward-facing flower turned slightly. Not toward him. Toward the dream. Its petals curled, not open, but listening. Cale knelt beside it. From the heart of the flower, a small wisp rose, a tendril of light, shaped like a thread of breath. It drifted toward the dream, touched it once, and then vanished. The dream pulsed again, once, twice. Then dimmed. Not asleep. But at peace. And in that moment, Cale knew, not all dreams were meant to root and bloom. Some had to be witnessed. Before they could let go. That evening, as the sun folded itself behind the western hills, Cale walked the inner curve of the spiral path again. His hands were empty. The basket, for the first time in days, stayed behind. He passed the blossom that faced away, it still stood vigilant, tilted toward the forest beyond the garden's reach. Its color had darkened slightly, like twilight pressed into velvet. Cale bowed his head as he passed. The dream had returned no thread this time, no signal or sorrow. It simply slept, or perhaps it had gone elsewhere, farther in. The garden was still, but not silent. There was a hum now. Low, warm, and round, like a bell rung beneath water. It seemed to come not from above, but below, from the roots, from the earth, from the long, slow turning of stories buried too deep to be hurried. Near the old stone in the garden center, the one shaped like a curled hand, Cale noticed something. A root had lifted. Not broken, not cracked. Just risen slightly, as though taking a breath. Beneath it, a flicker of gold. He brushed the soil back, carefully, slowly, until his fingers touched the curve of glass. A lantern. Small, smooth, glowing faintly from within, not with flame, but with the same pulsing light that dreams carried when they first fell to earth. He did not light it. He simply cradled it, sat beneath the stone, and watched the sky darken. The lantern pulsed softly. And somewhere nearby, something deep within the garden exhaled. That night, the stars blinked lower than usual. Cale sat outside with the lantern resting beside him on the windowsill. It no longer glowed gold, but something gentler, like starlight remembered rather than seen. The dream had not returned. The blossom had not moved. And yet, he felt no absence. Only a sense of opening. The kind that comes before the first words of a story too long forgotten to be rushed. He left the door ajar that night, not in expectation, but in invitation. Sometime near the softest hour, when the sky was the color of deep thought, he woke to a sound. Not footsteps. Not knocking. Just the faint rustle of wool brushing against the frame of the door. When he opened his eyes, he saw a shape in the doorway. A child. Or something very like one. Small. Barefoot. Wrapped in a cloak the color of late dusk. Their eyes were closed, yet they moved like someone walking through memory, not space. The lantern flickered once. And the child stepped inside. Not with fear. Not with greeting. But with the soft certainty of something that had finally come home to rest. The child sat curled in the patchwork chair beside Cale's hearth. Their eyes remained closed, but not in sleep. They moved their hands slowly across their knees, tracing invisible lines, like someone remembering the shape of something soft and lost. The lantern pulsed once, then again, and Cale knew it was no longer just light. It was memory, woven now with presence. The room did not brighten, but it felt warmer somehow, as if dawn had decided to rise in secret. He did not ask the child who they were. Instead, he laid a blanket across their shoulders and placed a small bowl of honey milk nearby, steam curling upward like a shy story. The child opened their mouth slightly. And sang. No words. No melody. Just a hum, low and slow, like the first threads of a lullaby being pulled from the weave. And Cale saw something change. In the corner of the room, where shadow met wall, a cluster of pale petals bloomed from the stone. They opened without roots. No stem. Only breath. The child's hum faded, but the petals remained, glowing with the soft blue light of distant dreaming. Cale closed his eyes. Not in sleep, but in stillness. Because something was returning now. Not a person. Not a dream. But the part of the world that remembered how to rest. By morning, the petals had vanished, but the scent remained. Not floral. Not sweet. But like wind passing through a memory too gentle to name. The child was still in the chair, awake though unmoving. Their eyelids fluttered now and then, not with dreams, but with listening. Cale stepped outside. The garden was no longer quiet. Not loud, not changed, but aware. Each blossom seemed to tilt slightly, not toward him, but toward the cottage, as if the center of their spiral had shifted. Even the outward-facing flower now stood straighter, its color no longer braced in warning, but softened, as though someone had touched its roots in a dream. He turned back to the doorway. The lantern flickered on the sill. The child stood behind him, barefoot on the threshold. Their hand was open. In it, a seed. Small. Bright. Pulsing with that same rhythm the dream had carried. They did not speak. They only offered it, palm out, eyes still closed, cloak trailing like nightfall. And Cale understood. This seed was not for planting in the garden. This seed was for planting in him. Cale did not ask what would grow from the seed. He only bowed his head, cradled it gently in both palms, and waited for the garden to tell him where it belonged. The child stepped outside first. Still barefoot. Still silent. They walked without hesitation, following a path that had not been there yesterday, or perhaps had always been there, too soft to be seen. Cale followed, holding the seed like a story not yet written. The garden curved around them, leaves shifting like breath, petals parting as if stirred by unseen music. They passed the blossom that once faced away. Now it faced inward, toward the spiral center of the garden where no root had ever grown, no flower ever bloomed. A place left empty, like the center of a dream too old to recall. The child knelt. Touched the soil. Then turned and nodded once to Cale. He stepped forward, knelt beside them, and lowered the seed into the waiting earth. It did not vanish. It settled. A pulse ran through the garden, not a shake, not a change, but a remembering. The kind of shift that happens only in silence, in stillness, when something finds where it was meant to rest all along. The child stood. Turned toward the forest. And walked. Not away. But home. Without sound. Without need. They were part of the garden now. And always had been. The days that followed were not louder. They were softer. Cale returned to his small cottage each night with earth beneath his nails and the scent of new roots curling around his sleeves. He did not search for more dreams. He did not carry the basket. He simply listened. And the garden, always so quiet before, now spoke in its own hushes. Some blossoms tilted at dusk. Others hummed when the mist gathered. And in the spiral center, where the seed had settled, something new began to grow. Not a plant. Not a tree. Something between. Its leaves shimmered with the soft shine of closed eyes, and its stem curved not up, but inward, as though folding around a breath too sacred to release. Cale watered it once. Then never again. Because it drank not from the earth, but from memory. From rest. From the breath of stars that watched from above, slower now, closer now, blinking like candles that never quite burned down. And the garden? It continued to grow. Not outward, but deeper. And those who wandered near it, lost in thought, or caught between dreams, would sometimes stop, turn, and find themselves weeping without sorrow. For they had found the place where dreams go. Not to be forgotten, but to be held.